My name is Nicolas Roope, and I am a founding partner and creative director at Poke, which is pokelondon.com. I'm also founder and creative director of Hulger, which is hulger.com. I studied fine art at university and graduated 15 years ago. And then since then, I've been in industry in interactive business since '95. So I had about six months out, and then got my first kind of job, and I've been in ever since. At Liverpool, where I studied, it was very liberal art course, and you literally just, they dropped you in a studio and kind of you got on with it. Which I think is not dissimilar to turning up to Poke in the morning. Sometimes, you kind of, somebody's got a bizarre or really, terrible product, or they've got a, really difficult problem, or they just, they just need help with something, and it's much the same. You kind of have to take this kind of crappy little situation and give it meaning and resonance, and that's pretty much what I do. I think that's what art students do. That's what artists do to a certain extent. Knowing how to kind of slot it all in, and technically how to kind of integrate it, but then also culturally how to speak in that environment. When you see like a kind of an advert that's been commissioned in another country and they show it in your country and it feels weird. It's like that hasn't happened in that instance, and you can, it's the same with the internet. When people try to sort of do something that that might technically be right, it can sometimes just feel completely wrong, because again, that sort of cultural sensibility is not in place. One of the toughest things about creating art is stripping things out and figuring out what's important. You're sitting there in a studio trying to you're playing with, some ideas, you're playing with materials. It's very easy to just pile it all on and it just turn into something else because one piece of it looks cool, so you build on that. Before you know it, you're sitting in front of something that you don't really understand, and that you have no chance to sell to other people or to kind of communicate to other people. The hardest thing is to kind of stick with the issues and really know, really build on them, and strip out the things that are just embellishments and are there just because they're sort of pleasing for some reason or other. Which I think our business is rife with, by the way. I think that's a lot. When I sit the international awards, I think that's just so much of it it has no core to it, because it's all like icing, and there's no cake, right? So I think that as an artist, that was the real sort of struggle to try and keep on the nub of the issue, and it's very much the same in these projects where, I mean, Balloonity, Spot the Ball, Unlimited, which was the never-ending web page. I mean, they're all very deliberately chosen as ideas because of their simplicity, and defending that simplicity and keeping that alive. So with the Unlimited never-ending web page thing, delivering a never-ending web page was really, really important. And that sounds a bit like weird, but when you look at that project, you'll see that on the right-hand side there's a scroll bar, which looks like a normal scroll bar, but it's generated by Flash, and we do a browser check and a platform check, so PC Mac check when you load it. And it'll serve the bar that looks like that it belongs to Safari or it belongs to Firefox, because it's basically it's an illusion. If we'd just shown a big Flash movie with a scroll bar on it, it wouldn't have felt like a never-ending web page, because people don't think about Flash as pages; they think about them as a sort of another space. So absolutely essential to delivering on that unlimited, never-ending web page idea was a scroll bar, because it's the scroll bar is the thing that communicates pageness and never-endingness, if you like. So even though it's the last thing people talk about, it's actually in many respects the most important thing in that whole project, in actually sort of making it exciting. Because if it's not a never-ending web page, it's just a page with a bunch of things on it, and that's much less compelling. And it's also one of the reasons we go for these very simplistic sort of ideas, is because it also affects the transmission of those projects. So, most of the referrals we get for all of these things are through casual, bloggers and increasingly sort of Twitterers and things like that. And those people don't tend to be particularly articulate. They don't particularly want to get their teeth buried into a long, deep story. So you'd give them something simple, and unlimited it's a never-ending web page, and most people can get their heads around that. Balloonist is a balloon race across the internet. That's very different situations. So they were introducing a new animal, and these animals represent different tariffs. So Orange are trying to kind of package up and simplify their tariff products. We just, took the balloons as a starting point really, and decided to kind of create this balloon race across the internet. So, be able to create a balloon, name it, have it as your sort of game avatar or whatever, if you like. Effectively, for a week, there was a balloon race that was taking place across the internet with all these players kind of actually running their balloons across real web pages. So it's a kind of like completely different project, but again, typical of Poke because it's very non-traditional. So none of that media was bought. All of those site owners signed up because they saw that there was a trade. There was something to be traded. It was like a contra deal really, where they knew that we were going to bring lots of traffic to their website, so they hosted our balloon race. So there was a trade. Traditional agencies would generally opt for paid for advertising, which would be more sort of banner based, more sort of intrusive kind of pop-ups or page takeovers to get people's attention. But obviously, because they're so standard, they're actually not that interesting and don't tend to get that much, that generate that many impressions. People coming to those sites that were hosting it, that were going to be at those sites anyway, they saw the balloon race taking place over the page. They had to kind of close it down to just consume the stuff on that page that they would do normally. So 3 million people came into contact with something that was incredibly unusual and sort of interesting, and was clearly not your usual kind of takeover thing, because they could, just by looking at the race, they could kind of see what was going on. But I mean, a lot of them were chasing it back to the source to find out more. And in a lot of cases, people were creating custom pages to kind of welcome the balloonists, onto their site and things like that. So there was a lot of, you came across any part of it, and there was a sort of, very interesting effect. So, and comparing that to more traditional advertising, where, the advertising's become almost invisible to most users, where we're very used to seeing it. It's always in very similar formats. There's nothing really engaging about the idea necessarily. Obviously, there can be in cases, but so even if you just came into contact with a fragment of the thing we were doing, it was obviously Orange. It was obviously something that was really interesting and something that people were engaging with more like it was an event than it was just a kind of traditional piece of advertising, which tends not to kind of touch the sides. And obviously, then you get that sort of secondary thing as well about everybody talking about the initiative because it's quite innovative and interesting. And again, even just hearing about it, will challenge your perceptions of Orange as someone who's not necessarily always perceived as the most innovative brand. So you have the sort of secondary part as well. I think when I was a student, I really believed that the sell process was something enormous. Be generating enormous documents and presentations, and that's not actually true or useful to think like that. I think sometimes at art school they would kind of like prompt you to try and go into depth and explaining your ideas, and you end up writing documents after documents, and it makes you feel like that's how the real world exists, and actually it's not true in all cases. And we work with television companies who pitch a 10 program series with a few £1 million budget, and it'll all be on an A4, be one pager. And I think that's actually because we used to work with them quite closely. That sort of helped our own processes actually, because that's one of the things that forces you to think, to put an idea down that's transmissible in a way. It's transmissionable. Is to really articulate it in a few sentences rather than pages and pages and pages, because all the backup doesn't. It can so end up just being a waste of time, to sort of anticipating all of the things, all of the things that are going to come into play once the project is realised. And it's all academic. I think by condensing it down to less, it's a lot easier for everybody to see whether it's going to work or not, and to sell it more verbally in a more conversational way. So that's what's worked for us. And again, it's not to say that that's how the industry works, because I think in a more formal setting, or if you're working with a bank or whatever, you might end up kind of buried under lots of paperwork, and they'll define the process, and you won't have any say in it. But left to our own devices, that's how we'll run things, because that's what preserves, that's what keeps it all sharp. That's what makes sure the conversation's actually on the real issue rather than rather than all this peripheral crap that can creep in when you're trying to deal with too much information and too many issues at once. One of the things we very keenly try to enforce, I should say, on our projects, our client projects, is that we will be involved in writing the brief for a start. So if you think about a brief, you always assume, the brief assumes that the kind of client knows what they want most of the time, or quite often they don't know what they want. So that's, we always take it a step back, we always try and take it a step back. Just treating the brief as an expression of it's more like clues about what the client wants, glimpses of the issues that we're ultimately tackling. So there's that stage at that right at the front end to challenge the brief and go and to make sure that those glimpses are actually taken us the right direction. And if we can turn that into actually a fuller expression of what they really want. Because obviously what leaks into briefs so often are kind of, and I want it to look like this, or I want, and it should do this, just because they want to kind of, they want to contain it somehow. They want to make it feel more tangible, but those things often get in the way. And like I said before, it's kind of, if we want to deliver something that's very, very sharp, then we need to know what's important for the client to start with, what really matters to them. And in most briefs, you'll find probably 10-15% of the stuff in there is actually on the things, the real issues they're dealing with. Everything else is just kind of stuff, padding or whatever to beef it up. Or I don't know why that happens, but so we'll challenge that. We'll try and work out what that 10-15% is, because if we can get that, then that's a really good starting point for us. At that point, we will gather a bunch of people, and that'll be kind of creative people on one hand. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean designers either. That's creative, people in the business who tend to think laterally. But it's often very, very useful to have technical people at those meetings as well, particularly if they have this sort of lateral, kind of more playful view on things, because problem solving almost every time has a technical dimension to it in the work that we do. So we'll get in a room. And we'll kick stuff around. We'll just play around in the culture of the project. So talk about examples. Talk about kick off. It's a very sort of informal brainstorm. We don't run sort of heavily structured brainstorms because they haven't really worked for us. What we do is try to create a sort of sense that the brainstorms aren't just an hour out of your otherwise production schedule. That brainstorms have a value, and you need to kind of earn your right to be there. So what we have been playing with is people getting chucked out of brainstorms if they haven't brought an idea with them, if they haven't brought 3 examples into the meeting with them. So they're also on their toes. They know they have to present an idea. It gets them, it sort of puts a bit more value on the brainstorm effectively, and makes them perform a bit better. But apart from that, we end those sessions with a whole bunch of ideas. Generally speaking, some which work, some don't. And really, I think with having worked with a lot of different sort of ideas over the last 15 years, it seems very obvious that you need to kind of you need to sit on the ideas for a couple of days, let them sort of mature, if you like, and then 2 days later, it starts to become very clear which ones are the ones that rise to the top, that really have longevity and that kind of tick all the boxes. Because in those brainstorms, you'll all get excited. Ideally, you'll all be really excited, but it can put you in a very sort of optimistic frame of mind, which means that as the dust settles a bit, you actually look back at the ideas and you think, these are kind of riddled with holes, or one of the quieter ideas actually starts to feel a lot more robust, because you can't, you're casting over a much bigger set of criteria, and finding that actually it's working much better. At that point, then we'll wrap those up probably and present them to a client. I think when you look at our work, sometimes you think, that's such a sort of simple, strong idea. It must have been really easy to sell that, because obviously when you see things in hindsight, you see the success and everything stacks. But when you're in that room on the first day, it's a very different story. And I think because clients tend to have been sort of brought up in old sort of broadcast media world where things were done a certain way, they've inherited a lot of those bad habits that don't fit our media. So every single step of the way is a sort of it's a struggle. Yeah. Obviously, when we're saying an idea, we have to have a reasonable grasp of what it's going to take, time-wise, resource-wise, to construct it. and engaging real sort of issues like whether there's studio time available and what that does to the delivery dates and the rest of it. So we'll be doing that quite upfront already, but in a loose way, because until the client commits, then there could be 3 or 4 ideas in play. One of them could be a 20 grand idea, one could be a 300 grand idea, and they have very different impacts, and they could also draw on very different sets of resources. Well, I mean, the people we look for generally, I don't really know how you characterise them because they're always quite different. I mean, everybody in poke is quite different, which is partly what makes poke. And the reason for that being that the qualities you need to deliver the work that we do need to be varied, because there are so many aspects to what we do. You need mega geeks, and you need like very creative like weirdos as well to kind of piece it all together. So you can't be a homogeny. So that reflects in our sort of tastes about what kinds of people we like to get on board. Which roughly translates into on one hand, trying to find people who are just engaged and are just excited about stuff, particularly internet stuff or internet-enabled stuff, and who don't, who might turn up with their books, show you all what they think is their official work, and then you ask them to show you their blog and the things they do in their own time, which are actually a lot more exciting. But you can see from the stuff they do, they just kind of live and breathe it. They don't draw distinctions. They don't draw lines between, creativity and expression and just doing their shit. It's just a natural process for them to kind of, stick a WordPress blog up and make it look nice because they're excited about something and they want to share their interests. Like these days, I won't even look at people's work really unless they've got a site. It just seems like you can't be a 20-year-old person today and not use the web to share your ideas if you're excited about ideas. I mean, it just seems nonsense to me. I can't believe that if I was at art school back at 15 years back and the internet was there, I would be doing stuff on the internet because if I'm interested in ideas and sharing those ideas and communicating those ideas, then the internet is the obvious medium for it. I mean, galleries are nowhere near as effective, are they? So what, again, if that's what you're interested in, which is what poker's interested in, then you would be doing stuff like that, and you wouldn't just be doing kind of by the book, ploddy sort of, blog by numbers. You would have a a flair and there'd be some kind of personality in it, and you'd be bending the rules to make it do the things that you want it to do, right? So I think we look for all of those qualities across everybody. Actually, I mean, even the technical staff who take on, have their own shit going on. They're not just career geeks. They're sort of interesting people in their own right with their own interests who, again, just pick technologies up and do stuff with it to their own ends. The cross, the sort of cross-disciplinary and disciplinarian. I don't know how it works. There's a fair bit of that goes on. There are some people that are just like deep into a particular kind of area, in which case they'll generally stick with what they're doing. But there is some crossover. So we've got a guy who came in as a sort of animator who's getting much more interested in the code side of it, because to make his animations really come to life and make them much more interactive and also sort of dealing with some of the performance issues and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the code side of it. And at some point just thought, actually the code is much more interesting than the actual animation. I'd much rather be working with 5 different brilliant animators and you're briefing them to deliver their side of things, and then to be really engineering the interaction properly, which is ought to be encouraged, because again it's one of those cases again where it's rarer to find a really good code person who can bring that stuff to life and who has that sort of visual sort of movement sensibility, but with the code side of it in place to really understand all of the outcomes and how to make sense of each one interactively. Because we spend an enormous amount of time developing these skills, which is why we can command like a reasonable income. Because obviously, with my value to poke is about my ability to ultimately generate perceived value to the clients that keeps them coming back to Poke. Now, if I step aside and do something else that no longer does that, then my value is questionable, right? So it's, it works like that. It's a tricky one, because on one hand, you want to sort of say what you are. So I'm a designer, or whatever it is, so that you can say, well, junior designers get X in this industry, and it's a neat package, and everybody understands the values. But at the same time, you don't want to cut yourself off from other disciplines, because really the most valuable people for us ultimately are people where the boundaries are quite blurred. We might hire them as a designer, but they might go and make movies, and that's fine.